Hello, I'm Michelle Coleman Mays, General Counsel for the New York Public Library, and I have the privilege of moderating a panel entitled Demystifying the Corporate Board, Breaking Barriers to Invitation. I am joined by three alumni who are quite accomplished, not only because they happen to be board service members, but in addition, they have day jobs. I'll begin with Sharon Barner, Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary, and most recently, Chief Administrative Officer, Cummings, Inc. Mark A. Howes, Group President, Life Cycle Solutions, and Chief Administrative Officer, John Deere. And Fred R. Nance, Global Managing Partner, Squire Patton Boggs, LLP. So let's jump right in. And I'm going to address my first question to all three panelists. A number of executives use search firms when they are attempting to join a corporate board. What path did you take to join your first board? And I'll ask Sharon to begin.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks to the distinguished panelists who are also sitting with me. My path was through a search firm, although I have gone both routes, and just in terms of talking to folks who are on boards already. I will say at Cummins, we've used both routes. We've used both a search firm and we've used a combination of recommendations from members of the board. That's where we usually start. So in this instance, for me, I had a couple of inquiries from people who were on boards, and I had an inquiry from a search firm.
Mark, what about you?
Very similar. I think for me personally, I sit on the board at Nationwide Insurance, and that actually came through a search firm. But in most cases, I'd say in my experience, probably 75% of searches actually don't go through firms. It's based on relationships. And you'll get calls or from folks who that sit on boards who are interested in you having you serve on those boards. I think that's important. And even when there is a search, the relationship still matters in terms of bringing it home. So I think you can't underestimate that as really the key element in making sure that this happens if you want to serve on a board.
I agree. Relationships are critical. Fred, what's your experience?
Michelle, first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My first board was in the mid-90s, and to be completely candid, I was asked to be a member of that board by a company that wanted to curry favor with the mayor of the city of Cleveland because I was his lawyer. I am on another public board now, and again, I got called out of the blue by the CEO primarily because of prominence in the community. I sit on the Nominating Governance Committee, and I would agree with Mark's observation that while there are occasionally search firms involved, almost invariably it is personal relationships, people who come to the attention of board members or members of the C-suite that we vet over time.
I was going to ask you the next question, but I'm not sure if you haven't already indirectly answered it, because I was going to ask, when did you develop an interest in joining a board? But maybe the mayor developed the interest for you. I'm not sure. So how would you like to answer that?
I developed the interest when I came to realize the impact that a board member can have on the policy of a company, the participation of that company in the community, and most importantly, as we all know, being fairly well along in our careers, it's about building your brand and your group of relationships, and every experience, including exposure to a board, only enhances that.
Sharon, what about, did you know a while ago that you wanted to be on a board, or did it kind of just happen?
Well, it kind of depends on what a while ago means. But I would say that, over the course of my legal career, Michelle, I had been in many boardrooms as the lawyer presenting a significant issue to the board. Only certain issues get up that far to the board. So something that they were involved in. So I knew about boards and I knew about boardrooms, but I didn't really develop an interest in being in a boardroom, I think probably until maybe 10 years ago. And it was my decision to come in as general counsel at Cummins and the interaction I had with their board, where I got a better understanding of the influence of boards across the community and across the company that they could have. And so for me, the interest in boards really solidified as I became the general counsel and the corporate secretary, because I had this greater understanding of the impact boards can have. And for me, at this point in my career, what I really want to have is impact. And so for me, it's been really about how do I continue to figure out how I'm going to have impact even when I stop practicing law. I want to figure out how I can continue to have that impact in corporate America.
Mark, I saw you nodding your head about impact. Did I hit a nerve?
Yeah, you did. I think that's I was a bit like Sharon in that when I was a corporate secretary, I think back in 2006, I took over as corporate secretary. That was my last legal job, actually. And it was insightful, right? For a kid from the east side of Detroit, I'd never really understood what boards did anyway. And so you get the opportunity to sit there with some pretty brilliant legal minds or business minds, and who sit around a table and deal with really complex issues. And you learn a lot, and you really begin to understand the impact they can have and the impact of someone's voice at that table. It's not a voice of direction, it's a voice of influence, and how you can influence really began me thinking about, what I really wanted to do. And frankly, once I started looking beyond my day job career, I'm not at retirement. I can see it. I can't touch it. But I'm still thinking about, sort of how do you continue to be actively engaged, as you go on, even though you may not want to do sort of the day-to-day sort of senior executive work, well on into you, as you get older, you want to spend time doing other things, but you want to really stay engaged and have an impact. And I think board service is one way where you can do that.
I'm going to turn back to Sharon here, because all of us have law degrees, although Mark, you said you haven't practiced law the way we would think about it for some time. But Sharon, did you downplay the fact that you had a JD? Because there has been a lot of noise in the system among some boards that say, we don't need another general counsel in the room, we have one. Yeah. So how did you navigate that? Or not?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I did not downplay my legal degree, although I did highlight the business issues that I get involved in, whether that is from a legal or a business perspective. So in my board resume, I start out talking about the deals and the M&A that I've done, but not from the legal perspective, just that I've done those things, right? My CEO put me in a program called Board Ready. And they were the folks who helped me craft the board bio. And one of the things I told my CEO when I first came to Cummins, he asked what he could do for me in my career. And I said, I would like to be on a board, right? Ultimately, by the time I leave, I would like to be on a public board. And so he set about to help me do that. And, I have, being a lawyer gives you lots of different experiences, especially in-house, as all of you who have been in-house know. You get legal experience, but you also get a lot of business experience in solving business problems. So you see a pretty broad swath. So I talked about that in my bio. I also talk about being a lawyer. The best response I heard to someone who said, we already have a general counsel, say, well, you already have a CEO too, but you're also looking for additional CEOs to bring talent to the table. So it's not the embodiment of what the person is, whether they're a GC or a CAO. It is what is the business experience you're looking for, or the governance experience you're looking for, that you can find in a lawyer or other people.
Michelle, it's been interesting that over the course of time, the popularity of having or not having lawyers, it's been sort of a roller coaster. There have been periods, the very beginning of my career, when it was not the least bit unusual to have your primary outside counsel include a corporate partner on the board. Then having lawyers fell out of favor for a long period of time. And it seems to be coming back, particularly in this compliance environment. in dealing with activists, dealing with issues that many companies are facing. Lawyers can provide value, real value, in addition to normal business operations. So like the answer to all great legal inquiries, I think it depends.
I knew you were going to say that.
And if I could build on Fred's point, because I think that the point about activists, but is a really big deal with that really provides some opportunities for folks who are with strong legal backgrounds, activists, and in highly regulated industries, because that's another area where lawyers tend to be at the tip of the spear. And so if it's that sort of industry, that also provides an opportunity for not just board service, but also for those who want to be CEOs one day. You think about where lawyers become CEOs, it tends to be in highly regulated industries as well.
Mark, you're right. And the person I think about who has just announced his retirement this week is Ken Frazier, because Ken started out as general counsel and eventually became CEO of Merck. But Sharon, I want to go back to something that I found intriguing, because I was going to ask you, when you decided you wanted to do this board service 10 years ago or so, did you have to get your company's permission? But it sounded as if when you joined, you made clear what your desires were when you told your CEO, oh yeah, by the way, let me tell you how you can help me. Of course, which is the best way is for someone to know what you're thinking rather than assuming they know. But he also put you in a program.
Right. I think a couple things. My CEO is very supportive of the people in his C-suite being on boards. He thinks it allows you to bring greater information and experience to to the discussions. I do know that there are some CEOs who do not support members of their team being on public boards. I was very fortunate in that he also sits on another public board, and most of the people who report to him sit on public boards because he encourages it, and he also helps. So, again, one of the first questions I get asked by headhunters is, does your CEO support you being on a board?
Exactly. Well, I don't know if you saw the article, I guess it was this week, a woman at Salesforce. Now, she was not in the C-suite. That's another interesting dynamic. Must you be in the C-suite to be considered board ready? In any event, she was asked to join a board, and she was told that the CEO does not support non-C-suite folks being on public company boards. She asked him anyway. He said, no, you may not join. So she joined, and then she was fired. So I'm not sure that's the path one wants to take. What's your experience, Mark? Did you need permission to get on a board?
Yeah, I did. And it was an interesting dynamic, because the way I sort of teed it up with my CEO, because it wasn't as if he allowed any other, nobody sat on boards, but there became an opportunity that, and you get the calls all the time and you kind of say no, right? Because you can't. But this one was pretty interesting. And unbeknownst to me, when it started, Nationwide has a strong agricultural background. It got started as a farm cooperative. And so, Ohio Farm Bureau, very actively engaged with it. And so when I start to peel it back, there was some similarities here that I thought would be really interesting. And so, I kind of went and teed it up, and, being a good lawyer, I prepared exactly how I wanted to make the ask. And I was, 1 minute in, and he said, sure, it's a great opportunity. So
you stopped selling?
I'm sorry.
Did you stop selling?
I did. Absolutely. Exactly. When the judge says, granted, stop talking. Right. So I did. But I think the point is that even though whether it's the CEO or sometimes it's the board requires approval, if it's a really compelling thing for the company as well, I think you should make the ask. If it's just about you and it helps you, but it doesn't necessarily bring any value to the company, I think it'll be a much more difficult sell in those places where the CEO or the board is not interested in having you focus on anything other than the company's success. And having your company perform well actually also helps.
No, it does. They don't want to hire someone they think is a failure, or they ask someone to join a board they think is with a failing company. But I have another question, because you somewhat alluded to it. You said that Nationwide had a strong agricultural background because they had this farm cooperative. Do you think that means you've got to have the specific industry experience, in order to join the board?
No, no, no. In fact, when I got the call, I was like, I don't know anything about insurance, and that's not my. I think it is. I think you got to think about what you bring to the board, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily industry experience. For me, I think thinking about the strategy of the company, where they want to go, thinking about who else is on the board, and what skills and capabilities they have, and do those capabilities match where the company wants to go? Thinking about how you can plug into committee work, right? What committee would you sit on? Do you bring a particular expertise? For me, in executive compensation, as an example, if you bring a particular skill in executive comp, then they may want you on a comp committee, particularly if you have a day job, because executive with a day job on a comp committee probably understands some of the issues that
Right.
management is going through, right? So I think understanding that piece is easy when you're certified financial expert. But if you're not, I think you've got to think about what particular skills you can bring, even at the committee level, understanding the skills matrix of that company and figuring out where you can really plug in. That's much more important to me than industry experience.
Fred, what do you think? You agree?
1,000%. There are certain skill sets and professional experiences that carry over into any environment. For instance, if you are involved in the management of a large organization, that is a skill set that cuts across any industry. The same having to do with common issues that many companies face, whether it is the current focus on ESG or dealing with cyber issues, digital issues. Those are issues that are common to many different companies. It's about the quality of the experience that you have had within your previous employment, as opposed to it being industry specific. Industry specific doesn't hurt, but it's not a prerequisite.
So I want to throw this out because it does relate to something that we talked about earlier, and that is the fact that we have law degrees. And Sharon said her retort is when they talk about we have one general counsel, and you say, yes, I have one, you have one CEO as well. The other rap on lawyers sometimes is that we're risk adverse, too conservative, going to take the less problematic course. What do you think about that, Sharon?
I think there's certainly an aspect of that in many lawyers, which is not a negative aspect, I would say, necessarily, especially when you're talking about risk management and understanding the risk. So on the other hand, where I see my role now as the general counsel is my goal is to help the businesses accomplish what they need to accomplish as efficiently and effectively as they can. And sometimes that has a legal impact and sometimes it doesn't. I do know sometimes when I'm dealing with my outside counsel, they are more conservative than I would be internally, understanding risk and the things that you'd have to take into account as a business, right? And so, just working for that mitigation, that bias, you just watch out for that bias. But outside counsel, sometimes I think the business people see them as more conservative, and you may have that. CEOs may have that bent as well. And even when I talk to my CEO, he always says that, lawyers will tell you no. And I said, well, if no is the right answer, that's what the answer should be. But no is not always the right answer, right? So I think even corporate folks, the CEOs who are helping make those choices, have a perspective on lawyers that you have to change.
Yes. So let's talk about doing the board CV, because to me, it does not look like a CV that you did when you got out of law school. So Mark, how did you tee up how you presented yourself? Sharon, you've mentioned how you began with, I want to talk about the deals I've done, but what did you do to make it look like the type of document that would catch somebody's attention?
I think I'd lead with the major point that there's a difference in the responsibility of a board member and an executive. And so executives, can you run this company? Do you have the ability to, the experience and capability to run this company and deal with the issues this company is going to face on a day-to-day operational basis? As a board member, can you provide the oversight and direction and mentoring, right? Can you actually help with the vision and strategy and risk mitigation associated with that? So I think you have to talk about the big things that you've done, and the experiences that you've had that lead to areas around oversight, that lead to areas around strategy, that lead to areas around risk mitigation, and how you've done that, how you've created a vision and how you've kind of put that out there. I think those things need to be front and center in how you think about that. Even your relationships. I think that's another thing that I mentioned this earlier, but I think the relationships that you have and how those experiences have developed very strong relationships, on Capitol Hill as an example, or with regulatory agencies as an example. Those things matter because those are the things you can make a phone call on as a board member and sort of get some insight that you might not be able to get as a member of management. So I think being able to highlight those sorts of things in a board CV is important. And I think the CV is probably this important. If you get the interview, then that's what's really. I mean, they assume if you come on somebody's radar, they assume you've got what it takes. It's probably more a matter of fit at that point than it is a matter of capability.
So I'm going to deviate from something I was going to do because you used the word fit. Because that can be code for, well, are we going to get a person who looks and thinks and acts like us? And my guess is most of you don't think, act, and look like most of the boards you join. So when you talk about fit, that can be a loaded word. Oh,
I agree. It can be, but it's one that the reality is these are folks that you're going to work with for the better part of a decade in some cases, right, on very contentious issues. And if you don't like these people and they don't like you, it's going to be very difficult to get the things done that you need to get done. And so collegiality on the board means a lot, right? The board, an individual board member has no power. The board as a whole has all the power. And so being able to leverage and really work with the other board members to get done what you need to get done is critically important. And if they don't like you, it matters, right? So I think you've got to own your space. I don't mean that you don't come in and just be a milquetoast, because then they don't want you on the board either, right? You've got to own your space. But at the same time, you've got to do it in a way that allows people to maintain their dignity, allows people to, you don't want to roll in on the board and you've been there 2 years and now you're the smartest person, who's ever been here. And these folks have been here 10 years, right? That stuff matters to people on the board. And so how you maneuver through that is important. Noses in, fingers out.
So Fred, the thing I wanted to ask you is, we've been talking about making yourself attractive to a potential company as a board member. And I think, Mark, you're right. It's a real thin line you walk, owning your space, yet also not being a pushover when you really have to say, this is the way it goes, versus being collegial. And you have to do that. There's no way around it. It's a natural tension. But how do you decide, Fred, if this is the board you want to join? We're saying it as though, oh yeah, any board who comes after me, I'm going to really be happy and I'll just grab the first shiny object. That may not be the smartest thing for you to do.
No, not at all. Particularly if you learn after you've accepted and gone on the board that there are deep problems that were not evident from public filings and or public information. You want to research the company that has expressed an interest in you as much as they want to research you. You want to know what the financial performance has been. Have there, for instance, been any restatements of financial accounts, which is a big red flag? Sometimes there are good reasons for that. Sometimes it suggests some underlying issues. Unless you are a certified financial expert, you probably won't end up on the audit committee, but audit committee issues can certainly occupy a lot of unanticipated time as matters come up. So you want to know that the company is well managed. You want to know what the dynamic is among the board members, the interpersonal dynamic. Just like any other organization, you can only tell so much from what you read on paper. You learn about the interpersonal dynamic by interacting with people. And tying back to the last question you were asking, Mark, it ultimately is about your ability to employ emotional intelligence to not only thrive, but to connect and to relate to people who are potentially very different backgrounds from you, to be able to do it under times of great stress, as invariably there are difficult issues that get presented at a board. And so you want to know that you can develop interpersonal relationships with the other board members that will allow you to contribute, that will focus on what's important as opposed to it being directed towards unconstructive behaviors when people come into conflict unnecessarily. So you want to get a feel for all that. And then you want to know, what's the strategic plan? Where is this company headed? How far are you down the road on that plan? What are the obstacles? And how can I play a constructive part? So I think some very honest communication with the members of the non-gov committee, whoever it is that's interviewing you, is very important. It's got to work both ways. It's like any other long-term relationship. You really want to explore it before you commit to it.
If I could add one
ahead.
other point to that.
Say, Mark, I call it an arranged marriage. Go ahead, Mark.
It actually, I love that, an arranged marriage. I think practically a couple of things that I would also suggest is things like, who owns the stock, right? Who? If you look at do you have activists in that company, right? Who are owning the shares? So that will pretend issues that you might have to address going forward. Are there, look to make sure there are no shareholder derivative suits that will be coming away. Are there investigations ongoing that may started a couple of years ago, but it was a big splash then, but they're still ongoing? You have a lot of C-suite turnover. If so, why? Why are people leaving? What are the issues there? Are there any big social issues? Color of change or some other big social issues that these folks are addressing? Are there other board members on this board, on other boards where they're having issues, right? And are those going to bleed over because they're having issues that they're either at their company that may bleed over to yours because they may have a requirement, that if you get an issue over here, you got to resign from this board, right? So all these sorts of things pretend are things you want to look out for as particular issues before you decide, yep, this is the board I want to go on. Because if those are present, you might think you got 4 or 5 board meetings a year, but it might end up being 10 or 12.
Really? I've been there. So Fred, I think both this emotional IQ, which I absolutely believe is important, and getting to get a sense of who are these people that you're going to be in this working relationship with, in addition to the very external signals that you can look for that Mark identified. Sharon, once you've gotten on a board, how do you get up to speed? You've got a day job again. So what did you do to make sure that you could at least zero in on where you could add value, for example?
So before I answer that question, Michelle, let me just go back to the one thing that I want to echo from Mark and Fred on this issue of getting on a board. Be, for yourself, you talk about the board having fit, think about whether you fit.
Exactly.
Now, you're making a decision, right? And I had an experience in which I really liked the CEO, but I didn't think I was a good fit for their board, right? Because after I met some people on the board, I thought it would be difficult for me to be on that board based on the people who were on the board. And even though I liked the CEO, I actually had to say no, right? Especially since I could only be on one board, I really wanted to make it a good fit for me, because you also have to know yourself and how you want to interact and what you want to achieve. So for me, that was a really important aspect of the board I wanted to get on. I can't go in and really change who I am today, right? So that was important for me about my own fit on the board. And then on getting up to speed, for me, I've onboarded quite a few directors onto the Cummins board. So I had a good sense of what it took to get up to speed for those directors and wanted the same, because of course I did a great job onboarding my directors onto the board. So
Excuse me, did you ask them?
yes, I did actually. My CEO required that I get feedback from them on my onboarding activities as well. And I've improved some based on some of the feedback they've given. But I also kind of knew what I thought it took to get up to speed as a result of that. And so, one of the first things out of the gate is making sure you read the public filings, the SEC, their SEC filings, their proxy filings, their annual reports, going to the investor calls. So I did all those things. Even before I sat in the seat, I actually did all those things to make sure I was prepared. And then they take you through, and I wanted to have information on the various business units that they had, what issues they have had, what's their strategy, right? Again, I want to know that I have a place to plug in. When I say their issues, if they have governance issues, I wanted to know all those things about the board and what the company was doing. So I had a specific list of things I was looking for to be able to read and engage based on the onboarding that I've done. I wanted to talk about their ethics and compliance, whether they had any of those things. They have a policy. Have you had any issues? Right. So those things that require that tone at the top and oversight are some of the things I wanted to look into.
Does anyone want to add anything to what Sharon has mentioned before we go on to the next question? Mark,
I would just add that all companies engage in extensive planning and budgeting exercises, and you can ask to be you wouldn't participate to provide substantive input, but as an observer, a new board member could ask to be included in those meetings and to just be able to listen and understand how the company establishes, how it builds up its budgets, how it establishes its expectations for performance. And you'll get to know the company really well that way. And actually the people involved in the planning like the feeling of knowing there's a board member interested enough to want to sit in. I've done that and found it to be very effective.
Yeah, I call that figuring out how folks make money, which is really critical to what you want to understand. So
that's
Mark,
exactly the point I was going to add. How do you make money? That's
exactly. So how do you think you distinguish an average board member from a really good one?
Yeah, I'd say, I mentioned noses in, fingers out. I think, and a good board members, in my experience, are ones that take the time to understand the company. They really take the time to understand the nuance associated with the company and the people, and are actively engaged in not just sort of helping the strategy of the company, but also engaged with what the next generation of leaders looks like. Because, boards, at the end of the day, boards got one really important job, and that's to pick the next CEO, right? And if you get that wrong, you're going to have a lot of other issues. And so being close enough to the point how you make money, and being close enough to how we are developing employees in this company to make sure that we've got a bench, or we know we don't, and we know we're going to have to go outside. But I think those sorts of things, and recognizing that they don't run the company, right? That you're there to provide some oversight. You can help with the strategy. You manage the risk. You can, you help with succession. But at the end of the day, you don't run the company. And board members who try to run the company tend to be those that are ones that are mediocre or actually poor. And management will talk about it, right? We know who they are, right? Versus the ones that actually you want to engage with because they provide you really good insight and they can help you think about difficult issues. And I think that's, that availability to be able to help think about those kind of issues, but not necessarily being one that's always, feeling like you got to turn the knobs, because that's not really your job.
Sharon, you're nodding your head. Did you want to add something?
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. I'll tell you, one of the things I asked my CEO is, how do you serve on another board, right? And you're the CEO, so you know how you want to interact with your management team. How do you draw that balance when you're the board member versus the CEO? And it's all the things that Mark just talked about, wanting to be there and be available for consult and oversight, and where they need you to provide strategic viewpoints, bring in diversity of opinion and thought on things. You're there for them to do that, but realizing that your role is one of oversight and not turning the knobs.
So Fred, I've been interested in the fact that many law firms are concerned about folks serving on boards because they think it could present a conflict when a new client comes into the firm. So how has Squire navigated that tension?
There are protocols. First of all, no one can accept board service without it being approved by our executive group. And of course, conflict is number one consideration. You want to make certain that the company is not adverse to an existing client or likely to be adverse in a significant way. Obviously, with a very large firm, it's impossible to avoid that completely. But you have policies in place in the firm that might require a board member to recuse herself or himself in certain situations. It is, of course, very important that there is appropriate D&O insurance so that there's no blurring of the line as the role that you're playing, because with a derivative suit or some sort of activist suit, if the complainant would allege that you were serving as lawyer as opposed to director, it could implicate the liability of the law firm. That is a concern. And then you also have the issue, which again has evolved over time, of whether or not your law firm can provide legal services to the entity upon which you as a partner in the law firm are a board member. Back in the day, no problem. It was all in the family. The proxy advisory services have taken a dim view of companies that have directors who are lawyers that are providing legal services. At one point, there was a de minimis standard, meaning if it wasn't very much work, it didn't matter. But and some companies will still, because they value both the director and the relationship with that law firm, they'll take the heat and they'll get a hit by ISS because of it, or the non-gov members may have some of the institutional shareholders withhold their votes when it's time to renew their role as director because of it. But for the most part, you just don't see it. Most companies don't give legal work to the law firms that their board members are on, but some do.
So one of the things that's also distinguishing for you, you've not worked in-house, am I correct?
That, other than I was the general counsel to the Cleveland Browns while also remaining a partner at the law firm.
Okay, so you had a little in-house service there, but for the most part, you've been in private practice for the bulk of your career. Do you
Absolutely.
think that gave you a kind of a disadvantage? Because unlike Sharon and Mark, they were in the boardroom with their companies and took that education with them to the place where they serve on a board. How did you make up that potential deficit?
Well, I had been in boardrooms before, but when I was in boardrooms, I'm a litigator. It meant the company was in trouble.
That's exactly right.
So that's not a directly relatable experience for board service. No, I think, again, in my career, it was the non-legal things that I did, frankly, that made me an attractive board member, because I've been involved in a lot of economic development, both locally and regionally, and been identified with public issues that the company viewed very favorably. But again, I think in today's environment, with the focus on ESG, on cybersecurity, compliance, there are plenty of roles for experienced lawyers to play, more so corporate lawyers than litigators, but there are plenty of roles that lawyers can bring that provide value to boards. But you want to leave some of that lawyer persona behind you when you're in the boardroom, because it's a very different role. And I dare say that when it comes to the concern about lawyers being risk adverse and therefore inappropriate as board members, I would say that the best lawyers are not risk adverse. It is your job to provide the risks and the benefits of a particular course of action. And if what the client wants to do is legal and ethical, you figure out how to make it happen. You don't say no. And so that's the same perspective that a good lawyer, I think, brings into the boardroom. It's important to clearly identify the risks and to evaluate them, but it's about problem solving. Ultimately, the best lawyers, the ones that clients value the most, are those who can take on complex problems, deal with them under very stressful circumstances, and come out with a good result. And that's exactly what a good board member does.
So, Mark, I want to turn to you because I want to focus now for the rest of our time. We've got a little bit of time left here about board diversity, and in particular, the proposed NASDAQ rule, which is looming out there. It has not been enacted yet. That requires this board diversity to either be achieved or explained, and do it in a way where you're disclosing why you haven't achieved the diversity.
Right.
So what is your reaction to that proposal? Why do you think NASDAQ jumped into that space? Are you surprised that it did, or are you cheering for that?
So I think I think they probably did it because they weren't first to the trough on that. They weren't the first folks to sort of, California's done it. The state of Illinois has done some things like that. So this is not unusual. So I wasn't necessarily surprised. Whether or not, we'll see what the SEC says about it. Still, I think it's a comment period now, so we'll see what they say about it. I think having folks add diversity to the board helps. I think diverse boards tend to, all the research shows diverse boards can, do better than non-diverse boards, right? So that's not I don't think that's an issue. I think that the concern is, can you really mandate this, right? Is that going to happen? But I'd go back to what, Fred mentioned, the institutional investors. They are the folks that are really driving this. The BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards of the world, with this, we talked about ESG, environment, socially governance. And under that social piece of ESG is a big piece of diversity. And those whether it's the Larry Fink letter, but you see a lot of those institutional holders really driving diversity on boards, or really questioning what you're going to do about it. And down to the point where, and we're going to make voting decisions around this. And so, and that would typically hit the nom-gov chair, right? If, or those committee members, if there's an issue. But I think overall, that's driving more of this notion around having more diverse boards than, what California's doing or what NASDAQ will do. I think the reporting piece will be interesting because now people will know. It'll be one place where they can go and find it. It's all public anyway, but now they'll be able to see it. And I think that will allow other folks that are interested to be more targeted to actually bring actions against those folks to, whether or not they want to do it. So I think in the derivative suits that I've seen show that if you talk a lot about it and you don't make the changes, that somebody's going to come and knocking on your door about it and saying, well, you said you're going to do it and you haven't. So why not? So I'm not sure how this will play out, but yeah, I'm cheering it.
So that's the answer is yes. So have any of you worked on diversifying the boards that you're on, and what approach did you take? Fred, what about you?
An amazing coincidence. I got a call from our CEO yesterday, the CEO of the company on whose board I'm on, saying, we've got a board member rolling off next year. I want to try really hard to find a diverse candidate, and I welcome your input. I think that social progress in our nation is certainly not linear. It is episodic, and sometimes completely unpredictable events can combine to create inflection points. I dare say our George Floyd summer is potentially one of those inflection points. I think there is a greater desire and awareness now for diversity that while there was a lot of lip service given to it for a long time, it seems more driven now. Whether it is the institutional investors, or whether it is the rating services, the focus on ESG, there does seem to be a much bigger demand now. For years and years and years, when you talked about public company board diversity, the topic really meant gender diversity. Racial diversity wasn't even on the radar screen. In the UK, there's a law requiring gender diversity on boards. The focus on racial diversity is just beginning. And I've been asked before, well, Fred, you know, we've been talking about it for so long, we, society, why hasn't it happened? I think there was an enlightening survey that was done by E&Y. It was released, I think, this past September. It was an anonymous survey of existing public company board members. And the results by gender were markedly different. The question was, do you really believe that racial diversity provides a stronger board? And there were 4 different answers, 2 of which were positive, 2 of which were neutral or negative. And among the female directors, like 77, 78% had positive. Yes, it provides value. Among the male directors, and since there are precious few Black male directors, that means primarily the respondents were white males, the positive response was on the order of 32%. Well, if 2/3 of our public company male board members don't really, in their heart of hearts, believe it when they can answer anonymously, I think there's most of your answer.
Yeah, it's amazing what people will do when it's anonymous.
So Michelle, I would say that's why whatever cudgel NASDAQ has or the SEC to move the needle, they should use it. And because once it's done, it doesn't seem so exceptional anymore.
Exactly.
Right. So it's getting to that point where you can't find the people, I don't know where they are, and then you find them and you find out the world did not shift dramatically. You still ran the company with the diversity in the room, and actually you probably got better input. We will have in May 3 African Americans on our board.
At Cummings, you mean?
At Cummins, yes. At the Cummins board, we'll have 3 African, and it was intentional, and it started 2 years ago, right? Our lead director is African American. As she started thinking about her own departure, she started telling the CEO, you need to be looking now. Right? And as I said, it started a couple years ago, and so we've just added an additional African American onto the board, and we'll have another one added during our May shareholders meeting. But it was because they were intentional about it, right? Because the headhunters kept bringing the same old people to the table.
I could say, you know, I'll talk about Deere first, but you know, we were very intentional as well about adding, and I actually did the search, and we had a lawyer. The one African American on board was female, and Alana Peters, lawyer, and when she retired, we didn't have any Black people on the board. And as the ranking Black guy in the company, I just went to the chairman and CEO and said, look, and he and I have a really good relationship. I said, you know, we don't have any Black people on the board, and I'm the ranking Black guy at the company, and I got to have something to say.
Wait a minute, you had to state the obvious, Mark.
Yeah, I did. I said, you know, we got to have something to say. So what is our plan to get some Black people? He said, you know, you're right. We do need to add some diversity to the board. You do the search. And I said, I will. And then I said, now, because Black people are not just, I'm not just going to roll up with Black people. You tell me specifically what you're looking for, specifically what skills you think you need for the board. So I can not just start rolling up random Black people. I'm rolling up exactly what you say you need, right? And so we needed a particular skill set around technology. And there was Sheila Talton, who's on our board now, runs a technology company. And, you know, so we were able to get Sheila there, but we also were able to identify somebody, Dimitri Stockton, who's also on the board, who had a particular skill in the credit banking area that I knew we needed. And so we narrowed it down to those 2. And we actually put them both on the board at the same time. And I think that was the first time that happened, right? Two brother and sister on the board at the same time. And I knew both of them prior to their joining the board. And so, we engaged a search firm to do the search, but, part of it is the relationships, right? You kind of know who might be a good fit for your company, and you pull all that together. But I think the notion of when you think about adding Black folks to the board, I think you got to be intentional about what exactly you need, right? Because it's easy to say, no, this one, not that one. Well, bring me another one. No, not that one. Bring me another one. No, not that one. Tell me exactly what you need, and I'm going to bring somebody who hits 10 out of 10 on what you're looking for. And then I'm going to make it very difficult for you to say no.
Well, kudos for you on the search. And so you said 2 at the same time, and the sun
Yep.
still came up in the morning, right?
That's right. And we've been doing exceptionally well. In fact, we just issued earnings today. It's been great.
Look at that smile. So Sharon, and we've talked about disclosures, and everybody knows you get very tense when you said, okay, this is going to be a more sensitive area to broach when you talk about diversity. But 3 companies have been sued over their diversity disclosures. Talk about derivative litigation, Fred, when you want to do your housekeeping, or Mark, and say, okay, are you been involved in litigation that's not favorable? So both Facebook, Oracle, and Qualcomm have now got litigation over their diversity disclosures. So have you guys had to grapple with this?
I would say everyone should be grappling with it if you're a public company. What are you putting in your disclosure documents about your commitment to diversity, and what are you actually able to show as a result from that? But not a lot of focus had been given on it. My feeling about our SEC's disclosures: don't sell tickets you actually can't cash, right? Don't go out there talking about all this diversity stuff if you're not really doing that stuff internally and you're not getting results. Because results are the thing that matters. You have all the programs in the world, but if you don't have Black officers and you don't have a pipeline of Black management, then you really shouldn't go out and talk about the importance of that to the company. So that's the first thing. You should be careful about what you say in your SEC disclosures. But the second thing is you should say things that you are doing, and you should be doing something, right? And so I think the focus from the institutional investors is spot on, because it's making people in their ESG actually put things in place that deliver results, right? So I would say, I think most public companies have at least some mild version of the Facebook problem, based on what we're seeing as we've looked across corporate America and the Fortune 200, and who's in the C-suites and who's on the boards and who's in the pipeline. I have not seen any stellar company who I would hold up as a mirror yet, but I think we're getting there. And I think the institutional investors focus on making your ESG comments look at what it is you're actually doing, and being particular and specific about it is a good start.
So I guess what you would say is under promise and over deliver.
I would say step up your promise and deliver on them both.
Yeah, I want to violently agree with Sharon. I think that today there are 30 different organizations that rate ESG performance of public companies. These reports and rankings are going to become more and more prominently featured. And the days of just talking the talk and not walking the walk seem to be evolving away. Literally for decades, you could talk a good game about diversity and do very little, and there were no consequences. We seem to be in a period where that is beginning to change. And I think, as you said, Sharon, whether you have been formally challenged or not, there is inevitability to the notion that you're going to have to make your deeds match your words. And there are plenty of external monitors now who are keeping track.
And I would add, those external monitors are also, particularly institutional investors, are also asking management to talk to the board about this. They want to talk to a board member, the head of governance or the head of comp, or if you got an HR comp committee, they want to talk to those folks and hear from them what's going on, because this is an issue of oversight, right? So the management doesn't oversee itself. So this is a matter of oversight. So you tell me how the board is engaging in this, and I want to hear from the board members. And so you're starting to see those institutional investors are really driving different behavior, even with the board.
So there was a study done by ISS, and it said the percentage of board seats held by women went from 9% in 2009 to 19% in 2019. But when you start looking at the diversity beyond women, racial and ethnic, it's been around 12.5% in the largest 3,000 companies in the country. What I'm hearing from you is you think that this percentage now has a chance to really shift up, because 12.5% ain't that much.
Yeah.
There's the potential for it to improve, but ultimately, I think each of us has identified pre-existing relationships and networks as a primary source of non-gov committees finding new board members. So it comes back to the same issue that we experience in so many other facets of life. What circles do you frequent? What organizations do you belong to? What clubs do you belong to? Where did you go to school? There is the potential for significant improvement on the racial front because of this demand, because of this pressure. But the success is ultimately going to depend on us breaking into those circles, forming those relationships, because that's where the opportunities come from. As much as anything else, it probably even more so, it's a personal acquaintance, some sort of professional connection is actually more important than your resume.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree, Fred. And so when you're talking about building that pipeline of potential new Black directors, it's also about getting them in networks where those folks are and understanding that you need to network and make relationships as a primary path to getting on the board.
You know, I would add, I agree wholeheartedly with both of those points. And I'd add, particularly as it relates to pipeline, what I'm looking for in this is whether or not you have, you know, so if I look at my own phone ringing around this, you know, the calls I get now are like, look, if you want to retire today, I can have you on four boards in the next 6 months, right? It's that kind of, there's a lot of activity around this. But I think that some of that activity is for people who already sit on boards. And so for me, if we improve this number, but what we have is basically existing directors become overboarded, right? Where everybody now gets 4. I don't think that's a win.
Right.
I think we've got to those folks who are board ready, who can provide, you know, would be tremendous board members who just need the opportunity to get that first one. Because once you get the first one, it's much easier to get the calls for the next one, right? So we've got to be trying to figure out how to get folks who aren't currently on those boards on boards in order to really have a greater volume, not just, you know, greater frequency, not just more severity among those of us who have boards.
Right.
You're talking about priming the pipeline, and that's something we've been talking about for the last hour. So I'm going to end with this question. If you had one piece of advice to give to someone who is considering joining a board, what would it be? Don't all rush to answer. Fred?
I might suggest, in addition to doing your homework from what you can find from public information, talk to the HR director of the company. You will learn an awful lot about the culture of a company if you know what sort of HR problems they deal with or don't deal with very well.
Thank you. Sharon?
Yeah, I think I would say make your risk known. Don't be afraid to tell people you're trying to get on a board, right? But be selective, and I don't want to just get on any board. Here, I'd like to be on a board, and here's what I'm looking for. A lot of times people don't even know people are looking for board seats, right? So I just think you, like anything else, you have to make, I would call it a little bit of branding. You have to at least let people who are on boards know you're interested.
Solid advice. And Mark?
I guess I'd lead with, you don't have to take the first one that comes along. I I think, Fred and Sharon have mentioned some things you want to think about before you make that call, but certainly you don't want to be the person who gets on the board and then 2 years later realizes, oh my God, I made a mistake. That's not a good look, right? So you really want to be thoughtful about, the board you get on. So don't just hop it, because don't get excited because somebody wants to date you. Right? Take your time.
Oh, in other words, if it's an arranged marriage, you want to date a little while before you get into it.
Exactly. You want to take a little while. Don't just take the first one that comes along, because if one comes, another one will come too.
Right.
So Fred, Sharon, Mark, I want to thank you profusely. I think you have truly demystified what it means to join a board, or to say it a different way, quoting from Hamilton, you've led us into the room where it happens. You have our gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
A pleasure.